Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited to be here again this week. Sorry for the delay in posting. Was not feeling great this weekend. So I am going to start off with a trigger warning about today's case. We are going to be talking about a gruesome murder, and I apologize in advance. I do give trigger warnings because if you do not want to hear about what we are going to talk about, you could just move on along. I hope you all are having a great day, and let's just dive right on in. Before the times of cell phones, credit cards, and CCTV, people feasibly could just slip away, hiding from anyone they needed to, hiding from the world to take a break, or maybe pretending to be someone else completely. In today's case, we're going to talk about an instance just like that. It was way too easy to slip away and pretend to be someone else in the 1930s. And Kansas City, Missouri was no stranger to the effects of the Great Depression and Prohibition in the 1900s. Though these were real concerns for everyone in the country, Kansas City seemed to be least affected due to the Pendergast machine. The machine was an organization that brought together immigrant groups such as Irish, Italians, Germans, and even the African American community, as well as numerous religious groups. And at the time, this was just not something that was really heard of, to have all these people coming together for a common cause. This was a highly diverse group, though some believed it did have ties to the Irish and Italian mobs, which meant that Kansas City soon became known for being a place to go for a good time. The mobs ensured that speakeasies, gambling, and brothels were open to the public. Kansas City was described as a wide open city, and it was even said, if you want some sin, forget about Paris, go to Kansas City. Kansas City was run by Tom Pendergast. No clubs closed, and the police chief Higgins was in the mob's pocket. He would go on to later serve time at Leavenworth for tax evasion, both Pendergast and Higgins. But at the time, they were running the city. This thought process, lack of effective police control, and way of life may have made Kansas City the perfect place to go to be someone else, even if just for a day. On the cold afternoon of January 2nd, 1935, at 1:20 p.m., a very unassuming man entered the President Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri. The President Hotel was a newer hotel. It was only about 10 years old, and it was known to host celebrities such as Frank Sinatra and Benny Goodman in its Drum Room Lounge. The man who checked in as Ronald T. Owen showed up to the hotel with no luggage, no change of clothes, just a toothbrush, a comb, and a hairbrush. He was described as a man in his early 20s, well-dressed, with a scar on his temple and what looked to be cauliflower ear. He was about 6 foot tall and 180 pounds. The cauliflower ear gave the impression that he may have been a wrestler or a boxer at some point, and he requested an interior room on a high floor and went about his business. He did make small talk with the bellboy on his trip up to his room, complaining about the hotel prices in the hotels surrounding the President Hotel. He stated that the price of $5, which would be $100 today, was way too high for the hotels around the President. He received a room as requested on the 10th floor. He was in room 1046 to be exact. After receiving his room, he thanked the bellboy and left the hotel, and would be said to go in and out intermittently during his stay. This did seem a little strange, but since the hotel was used to hosting businessmen and celebrities, they did not think anything of this behavior. The fact that Ronald came and went was not the only strange behavior that he displayed, though. While he was at the hotel, the maid made many notes of odd behavior. During his stay, as any stay in a hotel, the maids and the bellboys would stop by his room to maintain the cleanliness and ensure that he was doing okay. On the day of his check-in, after he was seen leaving the hotel maid, Mary Soptic, went to Ronald's room to clean it. She was surprised by the fact that though they had seen Ronald leave the hotel and no one had seen him come back, Ronald was now in his room. She also was surprised that he was Ronald instead of the woman who was there the day before. She was unaware that the woman was checking out and someone new had checked in. She apologized for the intrusion, but he told her to continue cleaning. He was sitting with the shades drawn, one dim lit, and this seemed odd to her. She stated that he was either worried about something or afraid. She cleaned for just a few moments before Ronald got up, brushed his hair, put on his overcoat, and left. He instructed Mary not to lock the door on her way out, as he was expecting a guest. The doors at this hotel locked both from the inside and the outside, so the maids could lock them on their way out, so he did, again, remind her not to lock the door. Mary finished cleaning and came back later the same evening to give new towels to Ronald. When she arrived, she found him in the dark again, this time in his bed, fully clothed. She also found a note on his bedside table stating, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." Mary left and went on about her night. The next morning at around 10:30 a.m., Mary returned to Ronald's room to clean again. She noted that when she arrived this time, the door was locked from the outside. She assumed that this meant that Ronald was not in the room, and so she let herself in. To her surprise, she found Ronald sitting in his room in the dark, just the same as the day before. The door being locked from the outside meant that someone had now locked Ronald in his room. She heard the phone ring, and Ronald answered it, saying to the person on the other end of the phone, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast. No, I am not hungry." While still on the phone, he also began to make small talk with Mary. He asked her about her job. He asked her if she cleaned the whole floor or just certain assigned rooms. He asked her if there were residential options for the hotel. And then he went on again to complain about the prices of the hotels around them. He most notably, however, complained about the Mulek Box outlandish rates, as he had apparently stayed there before staying at the President Hotel. Mary finished cleaning, took all the towels, and left. She was planning on coming back later that day to provide him with new clean towels. The day went on normally, and at the hotel, nothing substantial happened. Mary returned to the hotel room about 4 o'clock in the afternoon with all of the fresh clean towels. Everything seemed normal until she approached the door. As she approached, she could hear two men talking. She knocked on the door to make her presence known, and a voice described as loud and deep, not the voice of the man who had checked into the room, answered, asking who was at the door. She told him she was there with clean towels, and he answered, stating they didn't need any. Mary found this odd, as she knew that she had removed all of the towels from the room earlier that day. Yet she moved on and did not bother the men any further for the evening. The day continued again, uneventful, and a few hours later, a woman named Jean Owen checked into the Presidential Hotel. Though Jean did live only about 22 miles from Kansas City, she had decided to book a room at the hotel because she was not feeling well after shopping and visiting with her boyfriend, who worked at the flower shop nearby. Her boyfriend did come to visit her around 9:30 for around 2 to 3 hours, and then he left for the night. She was booked into room 1048, and she complained that she could hear a woman and men screaming and yelling all over the floor using profanities. She did not think much about it, and she went to bed for the night, not really worried about what was going on. She was not the only one that noticed that strange things were happening in the hotel that night, though, especially on the 10th floor. The elevator operator for the night, Charles Blocker, stated that from the beginning of his shift at midnight to about 1:30 in the morning, he was particularly busy on the 10th floor. He stated that after 1:30, it did die down except for a loud party in room 1055. During his busy times, though, he did remember one woman in particular. This woman was thought to possibly be a prostitute in the area. She had called the elevator to go to the 10th floor looking for a guest that she had originally stated was in room 1026, but she was unable to find them. She then wandered the 10th floor for about a half an hour. She called the elevator again, stating that she was still looking and believed that maybe the man was in room 1024 instead of 1026. As the lights were on, maybe they were waiting for her. She looked for some time more and then called the elevator again and went back to the lobby. An hour after leaving, Charles took the same woman and a different man to the 9th floor. At around 4:15 a.m., he was called back up to the 9th floor and she left for the night. Around 5 a.m., the man called Charles up stating he couldn't sleep and he was going for a walk. At around 7 a.m. on January 4th, Della Ferguson, a switchboard operator for the hotel, came to work. She was ready to make requested wake-up calls, for which one of them was to Ronald in room 1046. When she went to make the switchboard call, however, she noticed that the indicator light was lit up, indicating that the phone was off the hook, and so she called the bellhop, Randolph Probst, and he went up to the room. He knocked on the locked door that had a do not disturb sign on it. After a few knocks, he was told to enter the room, but the door was locked. He was unable to enter. The voice went on to tell him to turn on the lights. He still was unable to open the door, so instead he just told the man to hang up the phone and left. He reported back to the switchboard operator that he believed that the occupant in the room was drunk. After an hour, the phone had still not been hung up. And at 10 a.m., a different bellhop, Harold Pike, went to the room, which was still locked, still had a do not disturb sign, and was attempting to get him to hang up the phone again. Harold, however, came prepared. He had the key with him and he entered the room. He found Ronald naked on his bed, phone knocked off the stand, and a few dark spots on the bed sheets. He believed that he was drunk due to a strong smell of alcohol in the air, just replaced the phone, and left without ever turning any lights on. At 12 o'clock, the operator called again, stating that the phone was once again off the hook. Randolph went back up to the room. It was still locked. The do not disturb sign had not been removed, but again, this time, he had a key. He entered the room. The shades were drawn shut, making the room still dark at noon. Due to the darkness, he did decide to turn on the lights. This would set poor Randolph up for a sight he was not prepared for. When the lights switched on, the room was, for lack of better terms, a bloodbath. There was nothing untouched by the blood. The walls, the ceiling, the floors, the bed, the furniture was all blood splattered. The chair in the room had been turned over. The phone was knocked over again off the bedside table. And Randolph would then find Ronald slumped over the edge of the bathtub. He was completely naked, covered in blood and stab wounds. He had stabs to his stomach and legs. His wrists had been slit. His head had been crushed from a blow to the head of a possible lead pipe or blackjack. He had a cord tightly wrapped around his neck, but he somehow, miraculously, was still alive. Randolph ran from the room to find help. He returned with his assistant manager, but they, at this point, were unable to get into the room because Ronald had fallen over, blocking the door. Ronald was able to move, and a detective and Dr. Harold Flanders of the Kansas City General Hospital quickly arrived at the scene. When the police arrived, more information came out. There was other bruising on Ronald's neck, indicating that he had also been choked prior to having the cord wrapped around it. His wrists and ankles were bound. and he had a punctured lung. He had several skull fractures as well as multiple stab wounds in and around his heart. He was again miraculously still conscious enough to talk to the doctor. He asked him who did this, and Ronald said no one. The doctor asked him if he had tried to commit suicide, and he stated no. They asked how he got hurt, and he said he fell against the bathtub. He was taken to the hospital and unfortunately went into a coma. He sadly died in the early hours of January 5th. Detectives began their investigation in this already very odd case, but it was about to get even more strange. As they looked through the room for evidence, they found that all of the items in the room that could be taken were gone. All of Ronald's belongings were gone, including the clothing on his back. His shaving items, hotel toiletries, towels, toothbrush, comb, everything. If it could be taken, they removed it. The only items left in the room were an unsmoked cigarette, a safety pin, a clothing label torn from the neckline of a shirt, a hairpin, and a glass with a woman's fingerprints on it. Detectives decided that they were women's fingerprints due to the size of the fingerprints, not because they were matched to anyone at that moment. Detectives also found that the killer had taken the key with them as the door was locked from the outside. Police decided it had to have been more than one person due to Ronald's size. As stated earlier, he was about 6 foot, 180 pounds. But no one had seen anyone come or go from the room that they knew of. There was evidence that he had fought back against his attackers and that the woman possibly sat and watched as he was tortured. They believed that he had been tortured for some time prior to being left for dead. Police looked for any information on Ronald, but could find nothing. There was no known Ronald Owen anywhere that they could find. They decided that this was just an alias that he had used to check into the hotel. An autopsy was performed on Ronald, and due to the dried blood, they decided that he had been attacked somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m. Due to the fact that he was now an unidentified man, the police decided to put his picture in the newspaper. They also put his picture in the barber digests to see if any barbers would recognize the scar on his face. That was when Robert Lane came forward. Robert stated that he was flagged down by a man in an undershirt, pants, and shoes. The man quickly apologized, stating that he assumed that Robert was a taxi, and he asked if he could take him to a taxi spot. Robert agreed, and once the man was in the car, Robert noticed that the man had a scratch on his arm and was cupping his other arm. He made a comment about how bad the man looked, and the man swore he would be killing someone in the morning. Robert dropped the man off at a taxi spot on 12th Street, and he left. Robert did go to the hospital and said that the scratch on Ronald's arm matched the scratch he saw on the man in his car that evening. But the police were not 100% convinced that the man that Robert had picked up was Ronald. There was another account of Ronald being seen with 2 women in a liquor spot on 12th Street that evening as well. After 11 weeks, the case went cold and the police announced that the victim was unknown and the case was unsolved. March 3rd, 1935, the funeral home did publish that they would be burying the now unknown victim in a pauper's grave in Potter's Field the next day. This opened the gates to this case once again. The editorial room of the newspaper received a phone call from an unknown female just a few hours later. She stated, "You have a story in your paper that is untrue. Ronald Owen will not be buried in a pauper's grave. Arrangements have been made for his funeral." They asked the caller who she was, and she stated, "That makes no difference. I know what I'm talking about. The reporter asked the woman if she knew what happened in the hotel room that evening, and she responded stating, "He just got into a jam." Then the phone was disconnected. At almost the same time, the phone at the funeral home also rang. The man on the other end of the line stated, "Don't bury Ronald in a pauper's grave. I want to bury him in Memorial Park. He will be near my sister." He asked about the cost and everything and stated that he would send the funds special mail. The funeral director asked the caller about Ronald, and the caller stated that he had come to Kansas City to marry a girl he was to meet at Union Station. The caller stated that he was present at the meeting between Ronald and this mystery woman, and he said that after the meeting, they drove to the President Hotel where Ronald checked in. The funeral director asked what happened in the hotel, and after a very short pause, the caller stated, "Well, he didn't play the game fair, and cheaters usually get what's coming to them." 2 days later, the funds for the funeral were received in an envelope with indistinguishable block lettering, and it was wrapped in a newspaper inside the envelope. After calling the funeral home, the unidentified man also called the Rock Floral Company and requested 13 American Beauty roses be sent to Ronald's funeral. He stated that he was calling for his sister and that he would send the $5 special delivery the next day. And the next day, $5 arrived, special delivery, in the same form as the funds for the funeral. However, now there was an attached note stating, "Love always, Luis." Police kept the note, all the envelopes, all the newspaper clippings, and tested them for fingerprints. They did believe that they had found a match to the print on the cups in the room, to one of the prints that came back on the note that said, "Love always, Luis." No one came to the funeral, but it was done as requested. Detectives dressed as gravediggers and staked out the funeral in case the killer came there. Though the case went cold again, the pictures of Ronald were still being circulated nationwide to try to figure out who he really was. One day in Birmingham, Alabama, a friend showed a woman named Ruby Ogletree an issue of the American Weekly. Inside was a picture of Ronald, the unidentified man. Ruby quickly recognized this man as her very own son, Artemis Ogletree. Artemis was born in Florida in 1915. He was one of 3 children, and when he was a child, he had an unfortunate experience of having hot grease spilled on his head. It left a scar where no hair would grow right above his ear. The family did eventually move to Birmingham, Alabama, before he decided to leave home with a friend named Joe Simpson and adventure around the world. He would communicate with his family via letters, and they would wire him money. Artemis would handwrite all of his letters, and they were very focused and properly written. One example of a letter that he wrote was, "I think that fellow I told you about was going to open a business and give me half interest in it. Has definitely made up his mind to open in the spring. He is about the best friend I have. He has a big Cadillac. We are going to Excelsior Springs next week in it." Ruby was still receiving letters from Artemis from Chicago in early 1935, as well as in May from New York, stating he was going to Europe. These letters, however, used a lot of slang, and they were typewritten instead of handwritten. Example of these letters were, "I got poisoned on something I ate in a dump. I was laid up for a few days and my stomach pained me a lot. But I finally got over that. Then I got the flu and had to go to bed for almost 9 weeks. I guess I was pretty sick." Ruby was concerned and went as far as contacting the State Department to see if Artemis had ever gotten a passport to leave the country. She also reached out to any boating and shipping companies to see if he had maybe gotten on a boat or a ship without having a passport. After getting no answer, she eventually reached out to President Roosevelt himself, stating, "I fear he has fallen into some gang or something has happened to him. He has always been a good boy and has high ideals. I simply must find some trace of him. If he is in trouble, I want to know." November of 1936, Ronald Owen was officially confirmed to be Artemis Ogletree. The typewritten letters actually were tied to a murder that happened in New York in 1937, and a man named Joseph Ogden was arrested for the murder. He had killed a man that he shared a room with, put his body in a trunk, and shipped it to Memphis, Tennessee. One of his aliases was Donald Kelso. There was reports that his handwriting matched the logbook at the President Hotel for when Don would sign in to visit Artemis, but in 1950, the FBI concluded that it was not a match. Another suspect was a man named Thomas Barlow, who had been convicted of crimes against nature. He was investigated because police stated having in mind a murder supposedly committed by a sex maniac in 1935. For some reason, they assumed that whoever killed Artemis was a sex maniac for some reason. They also said that his handwriting did match as well, but he was not convicted due to conflicting stories that they chalked up to a long interrogation and his health due to him having syphilis. Ruby believed that the killer may have been none other than Joe Simpson, the friend that Artemis had left Alabama with. Police did say that they interviewed him and he was not a suspect, but she was not convinced. She spent years trying to meet up with him, but to no avail. Months after her son's death, a man called her from Memphis, stating that Artemis had saved his life and he was now in Cairo. December 28th of 1939, she would finally confront Joe. She stated after confronting him, "In talking with the boy, Joe Simpson, I was reasonably convinced that he is the person that talked to me from Memphis, Tennessee, 7 months after my son was killed." She shared this and nearly verbatim account of their conversation to the Kansas City police, stating, "He did say he did believe the case would never break, as there were no clues and left nothing for the G-Man to work on." I said, "Kansas City can well boast of it being the perfect crime." He laughed and said, "It is. They'll never get the ones who killed him." Ruby says she eventually looked Joe square in the eyes and told him, "I would know the voice that talked to me from Memphis." He turned red, dropped his eyes, and was nervous. The information against Joe didn't stop there. At one point during the conversations, he told her that he would pass her badly typed letters from Artemis. Artemis had never learned to type and had always handwritten his letters to home. Some also believe that there may have been mafia ties, as the name Don is used as a mafia boss slang. To this day, there is no answers in this case. It remains completely unsolved. Artemis's family has been left with no answers and no closure in this sad moment in their lives. Someone took Artemis's life that day and continued to write home pretending to be him. Someone led his family astray from the truth for months. Unfortunately, there are no answers of any kind as to why this may have happened. I do hope that someday there is some answer and some kind of closure for the family, but that may never happen. That's my case for today. If you enjoyed being here, please hit the like and subscribe button so I can continue doing this. Also, please comment below with any questions or thoughts you have. If you have any case recommendations, I do have a Discord channel that is linked in my bio. You're more than welcome to go over there and give me some case recommendations. Thank you all for being here today. I hope you have a great day. Stay safe, be healthy, and I will see you next week. Bye.